Hello, my name is Julie, and today I'm going to be talking with you about grief and loss during COVID-19. Today, we're going to be chatting about things like defining the 5 stages of grief. We're going to learn about the sources of grief and loss and the feelings that are associated with that. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to manage grief or loss during COVID-19. So let's go ahead and get started. Grief and loss are a shared experience by most of us globally at this point. We might not have given a lot of thought to the terms grief and loss because sometimes those can look different than grief and loss that we're used to experiencing. For example, grief and loss right now might look like depression. It might look like poor motivation, like loss of memory, anxiety, overall fears, and just some of the things and behaviors that we're really not used to experiencing for ourselves. Most of us have experienced the loss of some of our basic freedoms, some of our routines, even the predictable tomorrow, and some of the things we used to complain about as being normal daily routines are no longer a part of our daily lives. Some of us have experienced loss on a larger scale, things like graduations, weddings, even the ability to mourn the passing of a loved one. These are huge things that globally we are all experiencing together. Grief and loss can turn into fear. Many of us may fear for family safety, and we may even fear for the future. Fear for our elders. Some of us have elderly parents or grandparents, or even family friends that we're worried about. And even fear of your own mortality. If you watch the news or keep up with the news at all in any capacity, it's not easy to miss that most of the time we're getting daily reports on how many people have lost their lives to COVID-19. It would be completely normal to have thoughts of your own mortality as we sort of hear the news on this on a daily basis. Some of us are also fearing job loss and the security of a job or just any source of income that might be threatened due to COVID-19. Know that you are not alone in this. These feelings are normal. This has been a huge life-altering event for pretty much everybody on planet Earth. To have some sense of grief and loss or feelings about this is not abnormal. You might be experiencing personal loss and grief during this pandemic. So we're going to go over briefly what the 5 stages of grief are, and I'm sure most of you have heard of these before. We have anger, denial, bargaining, despair, and acceptance. These can all be felt in any stage at any time, and they are not linear, meaning that anger, denial, despair, acceptance, bargaining, we can feel any of those at any point in this process, and sometimes more than one at the same time. Let's start with denial. Denial is the rejection to believe something is true. Denial is actually a survival skill. It allows us to ignore the pain and move forward. I often compare it to how our human bodies respond with a significant injury. Our bodies are designed to put us into something called shock. Shock is a way of allowing us to not feel the full force of whatever significant injury has occurred in order to keep us alive. Denial is about the same. Its purpose is self-preservation. Denial can actually allow us time to process the events of what has happened in a less traumatic way. Some examples of denial during COVID-19 are things like, it's not that bad. I won't get sick. It's just a virus. It's just like a cold. Or only major populated areas like New York City or the coastal cities will be bad, not my area. The next thing we might experience is anger. Anger is a response to try and mitigate our fears. Fear can be an incredibly overpowering emotion. Anger becomes a way to control what we fear. Anger is not a bad emotion. Honestly, it can help us externalize our fears. If we're angry at something that's outside of our control that we did not do, That helps often to mitigate the fear. Anger can often look like blaming, or sometimes it can look like refusing to comply, not staying at home, not following the CDC recommendations. Anger is a normal part of this process, and it is okay to feel angry. Most of us will experience a sense of anger, and it's to be expected when anything sudden or drastic changes in our lives. It's an incredibly strong emotion and not one that we need to be afraid of. Bargaining is the next thing that most of us will experience at some point. Bargaining is the start of acceptance. It's sort of like a compromise on our emotions and gives us a less painful way to deal with the reality of what's happening. Bargaining is a stepping stone towards coping. Some examples of bargaining might be, it's okay to spend time with friends as long as we wash our hands and keep distance. Or, this will be over in 2 weeks. Bargaining can also look like asking a lot of what if questions, like if only I had, or if only they had, even to go as far as if only this country hadn't done it this way, or if only our country had responded this way, or if you know someone that's personally been impacted by COVID, even saying, well, if only they had taken this precaution, they might not have ended up sick. The next stage is despair. This also can be called depression. Despair is facing the reality of the present situation. This loss can feel staggering and overwhelming. We have to come to terms with what this has meant and the impact that it's made on all of our daily lives. And that can feel incredibly overwhelming and often with no end in sight. Despair or depression can be incredibly isolating as well. Especially now with all the restrictions in place, most of us are not able to see our loved ones or the people that we consider a part of our support system face to face. Despair or depression is a normal part of the grieving process too. This can often feel heavy and overbearing. It is also okay to feel despair right now. This is a major life disruption and the future is unknown. To have some level of sadness or grief about this is normal and to be expected. And finally, the last stage of grief is acceptance. This is considered the last stage of grief, yet it can be experienced at any point during the grieving process. In fact, all of these can be. You might experience two at the same time or keep going back to the same stage. That's okay and completely normal. Acceptance does not mean that suddenly we are okay with how things are. Acceptance might look more like, this pandemic has occurred, but in the end, I'm going to be okay. My family's going to be okay, and life as I once knew it most likely will resume to some normalcy at some point. Acceptance can also look like determination and resolve. For a lot of people, this might look something like, I don't have a lot of control over what's happening right now, but I'm going to impact what I can. So that might mean we make masks for people. It might mean that we start making donations towards charities that are helping those less fortunate than us. It might mean writing cards to people we love and care about, or just starting to reach out more to people, doing things that are within your control. Acceptance does not mean that you won't have bad days again, but acceptance does mean that you're able to come back to a place of accepting what this new reality looks like. So how do we get through this time of grief and loss? Again, it's normal to feel this way. We are faced with uncertainty of what lies ahead. I think most importantly is that we normalize this reaction. One of the reasons why we're giving this presentation is to give how we're feeling some language. Often we're saying we're sad or we're depressed. Giving this a specific language, I am grieving, I am facing this loss, is helping to normalize how we feel. Again, the stages of grief are not linear. Most of us will experience them at random times and will experience the same stage multiple times. Reflect on the grieving process. Give yourself permission to feel it. Name it. Name this as anger. Name this as bargaining. Name this as despair or depression. Again, give it some language, identify how it feels, and let yourself feel it. And then allow yourself freedom to face each stage without judgment. Also, allow others to face each stage without judgment. We are all in different parts of this together, and most of us are going to experience these at different times than other people. So, giving grace for others to feel how they need to feel, and yourself grace for how you need to feel on any given day. Remember that this is not going to last forever. At some point, this will end and life will go back to some sense of normalcy. We will wake up someday and these feelings will not be a part of our existence anymore. But for right now, they are. Thank you for walking through this presentation with me. And I hope that in the days to come, you'll be able to experience grief and loss, not so much in a place of despair, but in a place of acceptance and allowing yourself to feel the things that you need to feel without judgment or hesitation.